everyone, a pleasant day. This is I, Alan Sumili Bulaybulay. On this presentation, I am going to discuss two poems written by Khalil Gibran. But before that, let us first examine a brief discussion about his life. So Khalil Gibran was born on January 6, 1883 and died on April 10, 1931. He was a Lebanese author, a philosopher, a poet, and an artist. So he was born into a pretty poor family in Lebanon. He said that his father was an abusive alcoholic. Because his family didn't have a lot of money, he really didn't receive a formal education. However, he was able to learn English and Arabic through a priest who taught him the Bible when they made visits to his family. In 1895, his family moved to the United States and settled in Boston, leaving his father behind in Lebanon, because at this time his father was being imprisoned due to fraud and tax evasion. Gibran's curiosity led him to the cultural side of Boston, which exposed him to the rich world of theater, opera, and artistic galleries. His creative talents caught the attention of his teachers, who saw the artistic future of this boy. In 1912, he settled in New York and devoted himself to writing and painting. It goes without saying that Gibran is one of the most prominent and famous Lebanese figures known nationally and internationally. His good reputation was gained in two sectors. These are literature and art. Gibran was always fascinated by words and art. His ability to see the beauty in the world, as well as his spiritual traditions, growing up as a Maronite Catholic, influenced the way that he wrote. It was here that Gibran was to compose his most famous book, The Prophet. So the Prophet speaks of the yearning for unity within us all. Through a series of 26 poetic essays, he teaches us that only through love can we truly achieve that unity. The Prophet has been translated into more than 20 languages and is cited as the most widely read book of the 20th century. His writing uses pretty formal language, and his focus is very spiritual. Quite often when he speaks of spiritual love, he filters it through the lens of Christianity. Most of his early works were sketches, short stories, poems, and prose poems written in simple language for Arabic newspapers in the United States. The poem entitled Love is one of his literary pieces. They say the jackal and the mole drink from the self-same stream, where the lion comes to drink, and they say the eagle and the vulture dig their beaks in the same carcass, and are at peace one with the other in the presence of the dead thing. O love, whose lordly hand has bridled my desires and raised my hunger and my thirst to dignity and pride, let not the strong in me and the constant eat the bread or drink the wine that tempt my weaker self. Let me rather starve and let my heart parch with thirst, and let me die and perish ere I stretch my hand to a cup you did not fill or a bowl you did not bless. This poem is under the 7 literary collections of Khalil Gibran, which is the forerunner, his parables and poems. So it consists of philosophical poetry and short stories that relates to spirituality and greater selves. So this poem implies that every man is on a course of mystical self-fulfillment. So the author simply seeks to spend life in devotion to love, although the path to this perfect union is fraught with the temptations as expressed on the poem. So the underlying theme for this is on the need to spiritually awaken, in which the author speaks of the weaker self. Spiritual awakening is the most essential thing in man's life, and it is the sole purpose of being. So the title that talks about love, it is simply talks about God, because God is love. As you are experiencing an elevation in your conscious awareness, you will be increased contact with this divine love. So now let's move on to the poetic and literary devices used in this poem. First, we have here anaphora. It is the repetition of words or phrases in a group of sentences, clauses, or poetic lines. We have here, and let my heart parch with thirst, and let me die and perish. Next, imagery. So we have here organic imagery. It is the use of words and phrases that make the reader feel elated, nostalgic, fearful, sad, hungry, tired, thirsty, and a lot more. We have here, and raised my hunger and my thirst. Next, we have here personification. It is an idea or a thing that is given human attributes and or feelings, or is spoken of as if it were a human. We have here, and let my heart parch with thirst. Next, we have here symbolism. The idea that things represent other things. We have here bread, which symbolizes word of God, and we have here wine, which symbolizes transformation. So this poem is actually a free verse poem. We can see that it has no strict rhyme or meter. The stanza, it has 3 stanzas with 20 lines. And now let's move on to another poem written by Khalil Gibran entitled Defeat. Defeat, my solitude and my aloofness. You are dearer to me than 1,000 triumphs, and sweeter to my heart than all world glory. Defeat, my self-knowledge and my defiance. Through you I know that I am yet young and swift of foot, and not to be trapped by withering laurels. And in you I have found aloneness, and the joy of being shunned and scorned. Defeat, my shining sword and shield. In your eyes I have read that to be enthroned is to be enslaved, and to be understood is to be leveled down, and to be grasped is to reach one's fullness, and like a ripe fruit to fall and be consumed. Defeat, my bold companion. You shall hear my songs and my cries and my silences, and none but you shall speak to me of the beating of wings, and urging of seas, and of mountains that burn in the night. And you alone shall climb my steep and rocky soul. Defeat, my deathless courage. You and I shall laugh together with the storm, and together we shall dig graves for all that die in us. And we shall stand in the sun with the will, and we shall be dangerous. So the first stanza, so the poet calls defeat his solitude and aloofness. So we need to differentiate solitude from loneliness. Solitude is our time, and it helps us to reflect on ourselves. When defeat gives us our solitude, we reflect on what went wrong and what needs to be done to improve ourselves. This we cannot get from success. So failure is dearer than all the victories, and sweeter to the heart than all the fame and respect with success gives. So the second stanza, also the poet calls defeat his self-knowledge and defiance. Through defeat, we learn that we are still young and prone to mistakes. Through it, we know that we have a long way to go, and we shouldn't be trapped by the fleeting fame. When we fail, we receive criticisms and censured. Some of these criticisms helps us to grow, and through defeat only, we learn more about ourselves and become strong. In the third stanza, the poet calls defeat his shining sword and shield because it protects him from falling prey to ignorance and false knowledge. Through it, the poet learned that to succeed and labeled as a winner is to be enslaved. This is because when we succeed in something, we think we have mastered that thing and think no more. To think that we have understood everything is to level down ourselves and to be grasped by the ecstatic emotions caused by success is to be an illusion. Hence, through defeat, we learn about our weaknesses. And though we fall, we are to cherish the defeat just like how a fallen ripe is to relished. Next, on the fourth stanza, the poet calls defeat his companion with whom he can be himself. When alone with defeat, he can talk openly about his worries and hardships. People console us when we fail, but there is no greater consolation than defeat itself. Only defeat can truly tell us about what we need to work on, how to overcome hardships and challenges, and how hard we should work to reach the goal. Only defeat can break into our insecurities and soul and show a way out. Lastly, the poet calls defeat his deathless courage. He imagined himself laughing with defeat when undergoing challenges and together digging graves for everything that they shall leave behind. Finally, the both poet and defeat will see the sun and stand victoriously, for all the dark times are gone. And this will be dangerous because there is no one more powerful than a person who has learned to embrace his defeat. In this poem, it tells us that failures and defeats are what every one of us meets throughout our life. But how we react to them is that which decides how successful we can be. So Khalil Gibran's poem Defeat gives us a lesson on learning from our failures and appreciating them. When we rightly learn to appreciate our defeat, there can be no greater strength than our defeat itself. Defeat shapes us stronger and wiser and brings us close to fullness. To succeed, we should befriend defeat, and it shall be our greatest motivation. And now let's move on to the poetic and literary devices used in the poem Defeat. We have here alliteration. It is the occurrence of the same letter or sound at the beginning of adjacent or closely connected words. Defeat, my shining sword and shield. And we have here, and we shall stand in the sun with a will. Next, we have here anaphora. And not to be trapped by withering laurels, and in you I have found aloneness, and the joy of being shunned and scorned. And we have also here the title itself, Defeat. Next, we have here mesodiploses. It is the repetition of a word or phrase at the middle of every clause. We have here, defeat, my solitude and my aloofness. Defeat, my self-knowledge and my defiance. Defeat, my shining sword and shield. Defeat, my bold companion. Defeat, my deathless courage. Next, we have here simile. To be grasped is but to reach one's fullness, and like a ripe fruit to fall and be consumed. We have here imagery, sound imagery. You shall hear my songs and my cries and my silences. Sight imagery. Through you I know that I am yet young and swift of foot. Next, we have here hyperbole. And you alone shall climb my steep and rocky soul. You and I shall laugh together with the storm. Next, we have here onomatopoeia. And none but you shall speak to me of the beating of wings. Next, we have here assonance. It is the repetition of stressed vowel sounds within words with different end consonants. We have here defeat, my deathless courage. Next, symbolism. So the title itself, defeat, it symbolizes learning from failures. Tone. In each stanza, the poet holds a different point of view towards defeat by adopting a sarcastic tone in the beginning, only to switch it later on to a confident and resilient one. This better portrays the idea that defeat does not have to be tied to negative connotations. Next, we have here free verse. So this poem is actually a free verse because it has no strict rhyme or meter. And lastly, we have here stanza. So this poem has 5 stanzas with 24 lines, and the length really varies on this poem. That would be all, and thank you for listening.